Is your current success putting a lot of demands on you? If you're good at what you do, and you are, then everyone wants you. But that's no way to scale. If you're delivering spectacular results, you should be commanding higher fees, working with only the best clients. Welcome to the Hands Off CEO podcast, where world-class agency owners and consultants learn how to fully monetize their expertise and scale profits by doing less. Here's your host, Mandi Ellefson.
Excited for this interview. I loved your book.
I'm excited for it too. And by the way, I read your book. So thank you. Wow. I'm impressed. I mean, wow. Yeah, I read it on Audible. Or I listened to it on Audible, and it's very quick, but boy, it's just chock full of fabulous information. So it's wonderful. I loved it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And as I was reading your book, I could definitely hear in there that you understood that challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So it's, that's so much fun. And I invited Jenny to come on too. So I'm having just a few of our top clients going to be in here, just kind of, I be able to listen as a fly on the wall, and then maybe open it up for some questions, and then we can decide whether we keep that part of it recording or not.
No, I love the Q&A part. I always feel most comfortable with that, because then I know, I'm talking about what at least one person really would like an answer to. So yes, I love that part of it.
Well, and what's fun too is I've just recognized something is that, our clients, and maybe I shared this with you, clients are in this, and most of them are in the 7 figures, like 7 moving up to 8 figures. I have outliers higher than that, but and what I'm noticing is that there is an increasingly high percentage of women who are our clients. And when you take into consideration only 2% of women have 7-figure companies, like 2% of business owners, women have. So that's even smaller percentage. That's a really high percentage when we're looking at about half of our clients, incoming clients. And that's really cool, because we do very transformational work that is very female friendly, let's just say. And because it allows businesses to transform in a way that feels good,
Yeah, that's wonderful that you have all these women clients and yes, they're a good size, which is so fabulous. So congratulations to you for all you've accomplished. Wow.
Well, thanks. I wasn't saying that for it to be buttoned up, but just, that's.
I know. No, it's true. There are too many women with small, lifestyle businesses, and we want them to shoot for the stars, to dream big and win, right? That's what we want.
Yeah, absolutely. And they even get stuck at a small vision in the 7. And maybe we should talk about that too. I'll add that as a question as we go through it, because I think that's one of the biggest things. I certainly run into that, just thinking too small. And that is, if you think you can only grow as big as you can think, right? As you dream, right?
Right. So, right. And I think for us, one of the really critical parts of it is because there was competition, and pretty much in every industry, there's a lot of competition. I mean, when we started, there were 10,000 translation companies out there. So I thought, if we're going to do this, we need to be the biggest and the best, or it's not worth it. So yeah, that was the concept. And I think that's most people's situation. They're like, it's already being done. So they wanted, they should shoot for the stars if they're going to do it. Yeah.
It's a good thing to remember. All right. Welcome to the Hands Off CEO podcast. We have today on our show, Liz Elting, the author of Dream Big and Win, an absolutely fantastic book that I was actually my sister shared this book with me, who is another consultant, and just shared how life-changing it was, and how we both could just really relate to stories in it that just is so relatable. And what I love about this book that Liz wrote, and I'm going to share a little more about it, but it's just so relatable. It's so relatable for early startups. It's relatable for people that are at 10 million, 100 million. There's so many different levels that this speaks to and that's rare to have a book that's so valuable that does that can speak on so many levels. So I want to share a little bit more about Liz, and I'll let her fill in any gaps that I miss. So she's a founder and CEO of the Liz Elting Foundation, and a New York-based entrepreneur, business leader, best-selling author, linguophile. Did I say that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Philanthropist, feminist, and other. She's also recognized as the most successful self-made woman in the world. That's nice. That's a nice
Well,
accolade.
I'm on the Forbes list.
Oh,
I'm not
Forbes
I don't,
list.
yeah, I'm on they put out a list every year. So yeah,
Okay, got it.
yes.
And celebrated for her work in tackling systemic barriers to success, inequality, and developing the next generation of women business leaders. Welcome to the show, Liz.
Thank you so much, Mandi. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, and I I just love your book because the subtitle of it I should probably read because it's really important. Translating passion into purpose and creating $1 billion business. So, Liz, you probably know this. How many women really, like, what percentage of business owners, women business owners, have created $1 billion business?
I don't know the number, but not nearly enough. I mean, it's, as we know, it's rare, and we just need a lot more. We need a lot more of them, and we need a lot more entrepreneurs in general who think big and dream big and stay with it and win and get there, because that's the dream. Not that it's not wonderful to not get there, but it's very exciting, and so many people can do it if they think that way and then they do what needs to be done.
So why don't we give a little bit of background context about your story and what led you to the biggest pieces of the story that led you to write the book Dream Big and Win.
Sure. So what led me to write the book? I'll tell you. It was the book I wished I had had when I started my career and started my company in my 20s. I was determined to be an entrepreneur, and I can tell you a little bit about what led me to start my company. But if I just talk about the book for a moment, I started my company when I was 26, and I read every business book I could get my hands on, but I couldn't find a book quite like this. They were usually written by men. Nothing wrong with men. I love men. I see some men here, and I love men. I was, in fact, I was always the most boy crazy person out there. So no issue there. But they went through the process and talked about all the things to do, and not what they did wrong, and not what not to do. And I just thought, okay, I can't relate to them on a personal level necessarily. And they're saying, do this, do that, do this, do that. But I just felt like it was a little dry. I couldn't relate to it. And I wanted something that I could relate to, something written by someone more like me, who was very open and vulnerable and authentic. And I tried to be a little humorous. And with stories, with anecdotes. So that's why I wrote the book, because it's the book I wished I had, because it's my story about how I built my company out of an NYU business school dorm room into the world's largest language solutions company. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a book like that based on what I did right and the many, 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 many things I did wrong. So hence I wrote the book. So that's a long answer, but that's why I did it. And it's really supposed to be sort of a guide, roadmap mentor for anyone who wants to be a very successful entrepreneur or successful in business.
I certainly feel like it reads that way. And also, it doesn't have the condescending tone that can be in some of the other ones.
Thank you.
So, and you said that you had a different reason for why you started your business. Why don't you share that?
Sure. And I do think it's important for people who haven't necessarily started their business or are wondering if they're doing the right thing. So what happened is I had always loved languages. I studied 4 languages by the time I graduated from high school, went on to college, majored in languages, and actually struggled with, should I major in languages? Because I thought, well, that's pretty impractical. What on earth can I do with that if I want to go into business? And I knew I loved business. I had had jobs from the time I was 10 years old. I was taught to be financially independent, to depend on no one but myself. So I grappled with that, did end up majoring in languages in college. Then, and I lived in 5 countries by the time I was 21 and started my career. And then I worked at another translation company. It was a dream come true. I found a translation company in 1987. So many, many years ago, 37 years ago, in New York City, where I moved when I was 21. And I thought, wow, what a dream. I can use my language skills and be in business. So I got the job, started in production there, then moved over to sales. Did this for a total of 3 years. Absolutely loved the company and loved the industry, but I thought it could be done better. And that was important. I thought it could be more service oriented, more quality oriented. And at the time, it was the world's largest company in the industry. It was 90 people. So, okay, kept that idea in my head, left the company after 3 years, went back to school and got my MBA from NYU Business School. And then everybody was majoring in finance because this was in 1992. 70% of the students majored in finance. It's a great finance school. And I thought, well, that's what I should do. That's practical. That's how I'm going to really make money and be successful in this world. So I majored in finance, then very briefly tried out finance. Basically what happened is I got a job doing equity arbitrage at the proprietary trading division of a French bank. I thought, perfect, finance and French. So French bank, international bank. After 4 weeks, after just a few weeks, I realized, oh my God, I made a terrible mistake. And I talk about this a little bit in chapter 1, or a lot in chapter 1 of my book. Part of it was the culture of the company. I mean, for me, it was sexism, it was all men and me, but it wasn't just that. It was also the work. It was dry. It wasn't my passion. It wasn't the languages. It was number crunching, putting numbers into a spreadsheet. And so went to my boss after 4 weeks and said, I'm so sorry. I made a horrible mistake. I need to leave. How much time do you need? And he said, 2 weeks is fine. So after 2 weeks, I left. So after 2 more weeks, so a total of 6 weeks, and started TransPerfect out of an NYU Business School dorm room, which I had been living in. And I think the reason it's important is I was 26 years old. I was taking a big risk. I just had gotten my MBA in finance, and there I was starting from scratch in a dorm room. But my passion wasn't there for either the industry or the culture of the company. And of course, we should ideally work in an industry we love and create that dream culture. And that's, I think, what we all try to do when we become entrepreneurs. So that led me to starting TransPerfect out of the NYU Business School dorm room.
I love that. And, through your book, you share about different ways that you can get the team driving forward and supporting, and how important that is. And a question I have for you is, how do you instill ownership as the company grows? And you have less individual time with each staff member. It kind of gets beyond your touches with each person.
Right. Well, as we know, as owners, we're going to be owners, we're going to act like owners, but with each person we hire, we really want them to act like owners and think like owners. And we were doing that from the very first employee. And I think the key is with the first few employees, I mean, I remember our first couple, they were receptionist, operations, that type of thing. It's easiest to do it with the first sales employee. And we hired salespeople very, very quickly because, I think what a lot of entrepreneurs don't do that they could do that will help them scale that company, assuming they want to scale it to a 10 million, 100 million, billion-dollar companies, they need to build a world-class sales team. So when we brought in salespeople, for example, treated them like owners, did it with their compensation. So basically gave them a low downside and high upside, much the way we are compensated as owners, right? I mean, and they needed to be willing to accept a low draw in our case, but they could make more than they would anywhere else. And I can talk a little bit in more detail about how we compensated specifically, but that was really important. Also gave them goals, the same kind of goals an owner would have. Said to them, okay, and this we did with both employees in our New York office, and then when we were opening offices, we would hire a person in San Francisco, for example. That was our first external office. And we said, okay, you need to sell $50,000. That was the number in revenue for 3 consecutive months, and then you can bring on a second person. And then the two of you need to sell $120,000 a month for 3 consecutive months, and you can bring on a third person. And the reason I'm explaining this is that's the same way we as owners hire people. We can't really hire people if we don't have the revenue. So that's what we asked our salespeople to do. So they were very motivated by sales and thereby profit so they could bring on the next person and grow their office or their team from themselves to 100 people. And so that was very important. And then along with that came their compensation rose, of course, because their sales number rose, their book of business rose, and their title rose. And, we gave them a better title. So we really paid them and, we incentivized them like owners, both as far as compensation, as far as employees under them, as far as title. And, another thing we did with the salespeople, and then we also did this on the other side with production, which was our other biggest group, is they needed to come up with ideas, innovations. And, that was so important. The same way we as owners need to innovate, they needed to often come up with a new idea on a product we could offer or something we could do as a company to make us a better company so they could get that promotion. So that was largely on the sales side. On the production side, we did the same thing with promoting people where they often needed to come up with an innovation to get to the next level. We also created a profit center, which I can get into the specifics, but we paid the production leaders like owners as well. So when they achieved a certain level of revenue and profit, they would capture half of that. We would take the profit after a certain number, keep half for the company, give them the other half. That was a huge motivator because that was unprecedented in our industry. So I know I'm talking about a lot of compensation, but that was important. As far as overall, outside of the compensation and hiring more people and title change and innovation, we shared the vision from day one. We let them know our goal is to become the world's largest language solutions company. And we hired people who were motivated overachievers, who understood that and were good at evangelizing the company and sharing that vision, both with our clients, letting them know we were the best in the industry, and then eventually we could say the biggest in the industry, but also with the team they brought on. So they were motivated like owners and they acted like owners. Not to say that we didn't make some hiring mistakes, because we did, and we had to, terminate people or people quit along the way. But we looked for people who would do that, and those were the systems we had in place to motivate them and retain them.
I love that. And to have them think like owners and drive the innovation. That's really a challenge with nearly every business owner I've ever spoken to, is they feel like all the innovation comes from them and it's not coming from the team. So how do you be able to juice that in people besides the money?
Okay. So, well, we did that a whole bunch of different ways. One is the team members, often they, once we brought them in, I think it's critical for me as the owner and the entrepreneurs as the owner not to be dealing with the clients or every client. They were dealing with the clients. So they would talk to the clients, they would get feedback from the clients, they would anticipate the client's needs before they knew they had them. And then on the production side, they were working with the systems and they had ideas on what we needed internally as far as innovations. But back to kind of how you asked the question, one of the ways we did it is I was a big believer in interacting with the clients, with the employees who worked for us from day one, not just in a group, but one-on-one. And I had what I called one-on-one meetings, and ideally weekly one-on-one meetings. If that's not feasible, once every 2 weeks. And I would sit down with them and talk to them about a number of things, but related to the innovation question, I would ask them, what would you do differently if you owned the company? And, sometimes people felt a little uncomfortable with that at first because they wanted to be yes people. But, as time went on and I got to know them better and I asked them a few times, their ideas would come. And there were so many ideas that came from employees that, in response to that question. Another thing, as I mentioned earlier, we would require an innovation idea to be promoted. We also had innovation contests for our employees. And then outside of that, with written surveys, we would survey the employees and we would do that. It depended on the time. Sometimes it was once a year, sometimes it was more often, and ask them that question there. What would you do differently if you owned the company? And again, in exit interviews, when people were leaving, we would ask that question. So that was a very valuable question and my favorite question. So those were some of the ways we got them to innovate. And then finally, if they did come up with a great idea, and it happened a lot, and I can give examples of the types of ideas, but then we let them implement that idea and be in charge of, if it was for a new division, for example, they were in charge of the division that did that. For example, we were a translation company, but we were dealing with all of the largest law firms in the world, and we saw what their needs were based on the work we were doing for them. So a sales leader said, what about offering TransPerfect litigation support services? So, I could, without getting into the kind of detail of what that means, is he saw they needed these translations for big legal cases they were working on. So why not offer them other services related to the cases? And back in the day, it was copying, scanning, coding, blowbacks. Later on, it became e-discovery services, deposition services. But that's an example. And so we put him in charge of that division. So sometimes it was appropriate to make the person in charge of it. Not always, but sometimes. But in any case, they got credit for it.
Yeah, right. So here's what I'm hearing from what you're sharing there is that you're getting your team to drive innovation, but it doesn't happen just organically. You have to actually drive that. You have you're systematically putting it in in weekly rhythms. You're asking the question over and over and over again, making it safe. And you're creating a safe culture to be able to innovate.
Absolutely. And I gave all those examples of ways we did it. And also just by their talking to the clients, their job was to really know their clients, that to know them personally and to know them from a business perspective, and then help anticipate their clients' needs before the clients know they have them. Or on occasion, a client would say to them, and this happened to us, why aren't you ISO certified? Because we were working with the regulated industries, life sciences and finance. Just so you understand, we were a language solutions company for big companies, Fortune 1000 companies, and then also medium-sized companies that were doing international business. So ISO certification was something that a client suggested. And then we became ISO certified. And that was very valuable. But again, it was from what a client told a salesperson. But you're right, we had to keep eliciting it. We had to keep pushing it and encouraging it. And it worked because people saw it paid off. It really paid off because then they had something else to sell. They got rewarded within our company, of course.
What I'm hearing that I don't think you're saying, and well, you've said it a little bit, is what they're actually getting is they're getting showered with praise and recognition for doing that.
Well, yes. And certainly I didn't even talk about that yet, but one of the other ways we really motivated our employees was awards. We found opportunities to give awards a lot. We had sales conferences where we brought everybody together. When we were smaller, it was just a dozen people. Later, it was hundreds and hundreds of people. But every time we did, whether it was in the summer, whether it was around holiday time, and it was usually several times a year, we gave lots of awards based on things like innovation and all the qualities we wanted, but some of it was innovation and some of it was quality, some of it was service. We made it so we could really measure all of those other things, quality and service, and that was critical so we could give awards. But yes, public praise, they say public praise is 3 times more valuable than private praise. So we did that a lot in all different ways. We also had a monthly wheel spin in different departments where the leaders could win different things, and the list goes on, but those are some examples.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
One of the things that I heard you said I want to come back to is about how you love to hire like newer people that have a lot less experience. Specifically in your book, you said hiring new grads. I'm curious why that is, because there's a lot of people who will argue that younger people can be entitled, inexperienced, and like kind of have this expectation they just can skip really far ahead in their career without doing the work I'd love to hear what your thoughts
Yeah.
are on that.
Yeah, and we tried both. We went through many people. By the way, I did this for 26 years, and it was a lot of trial and error. And at the end, thousands of full-time employees. But what we found is when we hired people right out of college, they were young. The ones we hired were young, hungry, curious, didn't think they knew everything there was to know, and so moldable, and trainable, and willing to maybe take a little less in compensation, and but then they would get the high upside. It wasn't that we were there to take advantage of them. If they were delivering, we wanted to make it so they made more than they would elsewhere, and they would never want to leave us. And we did that with many people. But the point is, they were young, curious, overachievers, motivated, and they were people who came in entry level, but with the goal to manage 10, 50, 100, 500 people in a few years. Like, those were the types of people we hired. And we made some mistakes when we did, because some of them, what we found, and I talk about this in the book, is we would hire from top schools, like Ivy League schools. Nothing against Ivy League schools, but often the best people didn't go to those hardest to get into schools. They went to state schools, they went to all kinds of schools. It was a personality thing. There's a threshold level of intelligence, and then it's much more about ambition and motivation. So those were the types of people we had, and that we did the best with. We tried bringing in people with sales, running sales teams, or running production teams, operation teams. We tended not to do as well with them because they hadn't learned our way of doing things, our culture, and they weren't as interested in it because they thought they knew more, because they had 10, 15, 20 years experience, and then often they weren't as hungry. And part of it is maybe because they were married with kids, they had a family. Not that you don't want to give everybody a proper life balance, because of course you do. But when people are younger, they don't have responsibilities, and they're more hungry, and they think if they do what others won't, they have a chance to be leading 100 people. And so that's what we found, as far as people who had gotten to a certain level. The people had gotten to a certain level, they would require more comp wise, and they often didn't want to give back as much in return. So they never made it to the level where we could justify paying them the way we would the younger, inexperienced people who were interested in learning and interested in growing with us. So,
right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing you say too is with the new college grads, with the people with less experience, you're looking for some very specific characteristics about them, that they're moldable, they're overachievers, that they're really excited about learning. And that's a very specific, it's a very small percentage of college grads too, for example.
No, you're right. And I suppose they're not all that way, but it's easier now than I think it was in the 90s when we started our company, because back then there was no Google, there was no Facebook. There weren't these companies that started as startups that were growing. There were the Fortune 500 companies, the big names that everyone wanted on their resume. So it was harder. Now people like the idea of being with a startup, and if they can if they're in the early days and they can help build it, and whether they get equity or they get compensated the way I was describing we compensated people, they want to do it. Mm-hmm. But you're right, it's not everybody in this, and especially with this generation, it's not everybody, and that's why we need to make sure we find ways to keep their hours in check, and we did. But it's about, as you said, being motivated, being curious, because if you're curious, that's what it's all about. That's how you keep making the company better, and adding products and adding services and asking for feedback from your clients and figuring out what you need to do differently. But you're right, it's not everybody. And so you really need to have a comprehensive, like a long enough interviewing process where you figure out who you think is going to be that way. And then if you make a mistake, you let them go quickly.
Yes, that is a very, very wise advice. And I what you're sharing too is true with all hiring decisions, no matter what pool that you're tapping into, and whether new grads or not. You're looking at 80% being totally unhireable, I would say, for the role. And then within within the last 20%, you're a really small percentage, maybe 5% that you're even looking at.
You're right. Oh, yeah, I believe you have to interview a lot of people to find the right person, and you want people. I mean, I think you all, I'm sure, know how to hire, but people who are curious, they're asking the right questions. They want to know more about you personally and why you do what you do, or did what you did, and how you became successful. And then they come to you with ideas for the company. How can the company be better? How can we grow? And they understand that no matter what position they're interviewing for. I mean, so whatever, I could go on with all the important qualities. Of course, integrity above all. You need employees you trust who are going to be loyal to you. But I just, again, we had better luck with the younger people, with the exception of a couple areas: chief financial officer and chief HR officer, because those are skills for our business. I mean, for any business that you need to learn elsewhere, you need to come with the skills. So those two we did need to hire from outside, but production, sales, and so many of our tech positions, we did almost exclusively promoting from within. Yeah. I mean, to the higher level people, they started, as entry level, and they learned and they grew, and we did a lot of training, and then they needed to, teach themselves some things, and they learned by doing. But yes, that's what I'd say about that.
So you're mentioning a lot about growing people internally. How do you make sure that you're not promoting people to their next area of weakness?
Well, I'm sure, I know we did that a few times because we made every mistake in the book, but it's like anything. First of all, to avoid that situation, you give them a job, and you want people who are acting like they're at the next level before they're officially put into that position. So, that would be things like making suggestions for how we could be more efficient, we could lower costs, we could increase quality, we could grow sales, depending upon what's appropriate for them based on what they're doing. But coming with ideas, offering a lot of ideas. Someone who, gets along with the team and motivates the team before they are officially in charge of the team. So seeing those characteristics before they're actually put into the job. And I think everybody knows that that's what you're looking for. People who are impressing you in the role they're in and showing the characteristics they need to be promoted into the role. That said, we still made mistakes. And if we did, then we would just say, okay, this isn't working out. And then we would move them into a different position. But I think you can avoid it because you're looking for those qualities before you put them there. And sometimes you can tell them, we're going to promote someone in the group into this role in 6 months, and we'll have sort of an internal competition, and we'll see who wants it, and then they can show those characteristics too during that time. But it's like anything. It's like, do every hire correct? No. And if it's not, we change it and move on.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing is just like a speed of which making decisions quickly.
Yes. And I think that's really important because, yes, I think you can overthink things and you can worry about everything being perfect. And I used to be this way. I used to be such a perfectionist, and then I just got to the point where it was paralyzing me. I wasn't moving forward. And so you need to just make decisions, go for them. And, what we found as we grew the company is, 85% of the time, or 85%, it's hard to say, they were good decisions and we continued with them. And then another maybe 15, 20% of the time they weren't. And it's like, okay, switch it back. I mean, we opened a Sao Paulo office. I mean, at the time when the currency crashed, it was a bad decision. Okay, we needed to reverse it. I mean, we made it. There were a lot of, whether it was related to a person, whether it was related to an office, or whether it was related to a line of business. Virtually every decision you can reverse, so you can change. And so you just have to be willing to not overthink, make quick decisions, amass enough information in a short period of time, and then make that decision and move on. And most of the time it works out. And if it doesn't, just reverse it.
That's really a profound thing that you said. It sounds very simple, but you can just reverse the decision.
Yeah.
But it's so often that we overthink these decisions. We take way too much time to make decisions when we could just make the decisions. And like you said, we can reverse it if it doesn't work out. And the overall cost of slowing down and not making the decisions is way worse than making sure it's just perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I think of decisions that are not reversible. There's so few when you're growing a business. And the only one that really comes to mind right off the top of my head is acquiring a company. Once you acquire another company, and that's a big decision. Yeah, that's a hard one to reverse, but there aren't too many others. Even whether it's the name of the company, the logo, I mean, all the services you offer, all of these things can be changed and sometimes do need to be changed over time.
Yeah. I love that. So I wanted to talk about, dreaming, visioning. And when you started this company, realistically, where did you think it was going to go?
Well, it's interesting. I was in that dorm room, miserable in that finance job that I was in very briefly. And I just thought, I loved the translation industry. I loved solving clients' problems and dealing with the linguists. I thought, but I know a lot of people who are doing this. There were 10,000 other translation companies out there at the time. The reason there were so many is they were usually between 1 and 5 people. They were started and run by linguists who were so busy doing the language work, they couldn't scale their companies. So I thought, okay, well, I need to do it differently and better. And at first I thought, well, how big can it be? And I think the number 15 people crossed my mind for like a minute or an hour or whatever it was. And I thought, no, if we're going to do this, and I realized this pretty quickly, we're going to go all out and we're going to make this different and better. There I was with my MBA and I had these ideas on how it could be different and better. And we're going to make it the world's biggest and the best. And I thought we were in a better position to do that because we weren't doing the language work the way virtually all the other company owners at the time were, because I didn't have the talent. I may have studied 4 languages, but I couldn't do translator level work. I mean, it's very high level work. So I thought, okay, I'll be the business person. And I thought, okay, the way we're going to differentiate ourselves is spoiling the client with service, because that was one of the issues I saw at the other company that was not where it needed to be. And another idea was we're going to offer a diverse range of language and technology solutions. I mean, the technology came in later, but a full range of solutions, a real one-stop shop or end-to-end solution provider. So that was another idea I had. And then we're going to have faster turnaround times. We're going to operate with urgency, and we're going to have a better culture. We're going to make everybody on the same team. Production and sales, which was 90% of our company, are going to be on the same team because they weren't at the other company. And that's what's going to grow this company. So, and those are some, I mean, basically on the same team, and we're going to be an employer of choice in our industry and any industry. Those are some of the differentiators that I thought we could incorporate. And so that's why, but yes, the goal was to be the biggest and the best, back to your original question.
So what advice would you give to a business owner that maybe is thinking too small? Maybe they have so much potential, but they can only just kind of see just as far as the end of their hand.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, no, and I totally understand that. And I think one of the things I said before is build a world-class sales team, because you may be the salesperson who cares the most and the best at it, but without, and certainly initially that will be the case. But if you early on think, okay, I may be dealing with a crazy number of clients, now, but the only way I'm going to scale this company is to build the team and train the team and incentivize them to care the way I do. So build that world-class sales team. And then the same thing on the production side, build a world-class production team. And I think what you find over time is if you really do that and work, as we all know, on the business rather than in the business, it actually makes life easier and better. But also you end up, after you find the right people and you train them, you have people who are a lot better than you are at these things. I mean, certainly I found that with sales, we had people who were just so talented, crushing it in sales in a way I could never do. And same with on the production side. And obviously in tech, I was never a tech person. But the point is, you just need to be willing to let go. You share the goals, you share the vision, you share what your differentiators were. And for me, one of the reasons it was hard to let go is we couldn't make mistakes. I mean, we had to hire detail-oriented people, because if you give back translation work with mistakes, I mean, it can kill people. I mean, the same way, one example with translation work is we did work for all the big pharmaceutical firms. And we did a patient insert. Take this, drug once a day, but if you put once into Spanish, once is once, 11 times a day. If you have the wrong translation, it says once and someone takes it. I mean, I'm explaining why quality had to be perfect, but I guess what you need to do is you need to let them know we need systems in place where, quality is what it needs to be, and etc. But now I'm sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but the point is you need to delegate and you need to incentivize, and you will find people who are better at it than you are. And I think that comes back to the hiring. I always felt like, don't settle. Often you need people so badly when you're trying so hard to grow. And then you get what you want, you grow and you have a big client and you desperately need people, but don't settle, because that'll make your life harder, because you'll just be busy fixing their work rather than being relieved of some of your responsibilities. Instead, hire people who really impress you. And yeah, I think it is a numbers game, as we were saying before, because there are a lot of people out there who aren't going to be what you need, but you hire people who impress you. And then of course, if they're showing the wrong characteristics and character traits that are not simply just changeable things, like, okay, this is how we do it here, then let them go. Yeah.
Got it. And so what I'm hearing is that it makes a lot of sense to continue pushing that vision, because the business actually becomes easier as it grows.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I mean, we had people who were very excited we evangelized it to them. We pushed the vision. We shared the goal was to be the biggest and the best. The goal is to be the most innovative. The goal is to be the most cutting edge company in our industry, the most service oriented. And then they were incentivized to do it because they knew they could do better at our company than they could at any other company in the industry. And if they left, they would have a hard time finding something even outside of our company, that recognized them as much and incentivized them as much. And, because they wanted to create an industry leader, and then they wanted to be a leader within that leader. Yeah. But they were very good at incentivizing or evangelizing, the message too. And that was a critical part of being a leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So in your book, you talked about being really tied to the business at a certain point within just mere hours of having babies, and how you learn how the business had to be able to operate with you. I mean, this hands-off CEO podcast, so I think it's a relevant question to get into here. What advice would you give to someone who struggles to remove themselves from the day-to-day without hurting the company? Actually, do you want to share a little bit more about your story? I think that would be interesting. Like, what was that like? You basically had no maternity leave. You're in the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, first of all, companies need that. So, right, that was ridiculous. Well, I mean, I was in the hospital. I had no one to leave me. At the time, we were 150 people, so you'd think someone could have stepped in and handled what I was handling. But at the time, I was signing every check. I was looking at payroll, and I didn't have a backup for those tasks, because I was slow to let go of those tasks, because we had people who were dishonest before, and we know what that's like. You need people who are not stealing from you. You need people you can trust. So, but what I learned from that is it was not sustainable. I didn't take any maternity leave. I worked the day I had my kids. I mean, actually, one I had on a Saturday, so I worked till the Friday night, and the other I had on a Wednesday, and I worked on and the same thing with on the following in, I didn't take maternity leave because I didn't have a backup. So I think for you as the leader, you always need a person in place to back you up, whether it's because you're having a baby or because you get hit by a bus or because you have some other illness or whatever, or because you want to let go a little and spend time with your family. You need to have a person who can do everything you do. And I didn't do it. And I learned the hard way. And I talk about that in chapter 7 of my book. It was misery not having such a person. And don't wait until you're at 150 people. It took a lot longer. We were at hundreds of people before I felt like I could leave for a couple of weeks. But the point is, don't do that. So have a succession plan, a person in place who can take over. Of course, you need to hire people you can trust and who, care about the business like it's their own. What else can I say about that? I mean, that's the most important thing. You need to make sure you do that. And you need that for every position, because obviously it's not, but for you as the leader, it's what you're, going to care about and think about. And so you want to have one person who can do it, but you can also spread it among multiples. Obviously that will help solve the problem too. But the point is, you can't be indispensable. You need someone who can take over if something that happens to you. And the last thing I'll say on it is, obviously it's going to make you much happier as a person and your family much happier, but also make the business much more sellable, right? Work on the business rather than in the business. Once I figured out I needed the right backup in place, we did have that over the years. And then I became quite, I didn't have a one person running it, but if you have amazing people running all of it, then the goal is to, not all of it, all of the different departments, then you can promote one of them to run all, or you can have someone just running it all. But the point is, it makes it more sellable and it makes your life better and your family's life better. So you have to do it. That's the point.
And one of the things that really landed with me when you shared that is that it was actually harder for you to do that as the company got larger, and it's easier to do it when it's smaller, when that might be something that people think is the other way around.
Yeah, no, you're right. It was, because there were too many things to worry about. And I didn't focus necessarily on the most senior positions early on, because it's hard, because in our case, we did so much promotion from within. We didn't, but yeah, it did get harder as the company got bigger. People always assume if you have 100 people, you're not necessarily so necessary, but you need to actively set it up so you have a person who can do all the things you can do, and you can be away for a week or a month or forever if that's how, it needs to be.
I love that, Liz. So, any final thoughts that from questions I didn't ask that you'd love to share something on?
Well, I think basically the employees were so key. And, as I mentioned, we relied a lot on those employees to build our company. And I know it's not easy. And we also had, as I said earlier, we hired a lot of people, and then some left and some we had to terminate. But you want to hire people who want to build the company the way you do. And of course, you need to incentivize them to do that. So they're paid like an owner. So they're rewarded like an owner. And sometimes it's phantom stock, but the point, or regular stock. But the point is, you need to hire the right people and then spoil the client with service and quality. And then, of course, the revenue and the value of the company will come. But, again, it's back to the people. It's all about the best people and setting it up so you have, the best company in the industry with the best culture out there and the best product and the best service. And that's really the key. But last final thought is, don't think too small, because it can be easy to run a big company as a small company. To actually, over time, it got easier because we had more options and it was easier to hire for it. So don't think small. It's exciting. to think big, and it just involves a little more risk. But if you're doing all the right things and spoiling your client with quality and service, it usually works out.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Liz. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Again, Dream Big and Win. Where can people find the book?
So the book can be found on Amazon, and on Audible, and in retail bookstores, Barnes and Noble, and many others.
So then, if they want to hear more about you or follow more of your amazing content, where can people find you?
So I'm on all the social forums, and LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, X, Threads. So that's where I am. And I also have a website, lizelting.com, and my foundation has a website, elizabetheltingfoundation.com.
Wonderful. We'll make sure that all of those are in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Liz. It was certainly a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Mandi. I loved our conversation.
This is Mandi Ellefson with the Hands Off CEO podcast, signing off.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Hands Off CEO with Mandi Ellefson. If you want to work less and make more, make sure you subscribe and get a new episode every week, and help spread the word by leaving a review.